I wanted to start us off by just reading out something from one of the readings this week. Not the intro, but just this bit because I think it's gorgeous. Okay. Art is not about thinking something up. It's about the opposite, getting something down. The directions are important here. If we are trying to think something up, we are straining to reach for something that's just beyond our grasp, up there in the stratosphere where art lives on high. When we get something down, there is no strain. We are not doing, we're getting. Someone or something else is doing the doing. Instead of reaching for inventions, we are engaged in listening.
Yeah, I really loved that too. And it was such a nice visual of, right, we're getting something down. Like, I mean, we've talked about this in past episodes about how we are the channel for creativity. And that visual is a great reminder of being that channel. You know, there's something coming from on high that we are supposed to get down. We are not the ones to be like, let me pick and choose which shiny new apple I want to take. But I do want to mention that we're coming back to the podcast now after a 2-week break. So we've had lots of time to let some creative juices flow, lots of time to think about this specific week in particular. So this should be an interesting one.
This week got a lot more time. This week got 3 weeks, which is unfair, but good because it's a really juicy week. I think the main, when we talk about listening, there's so many different ways to go with this, but I want to start us off with listening to our body because that has been, for me, the main theme of these past weeks. So quick, brief medical story time, just to get us in. So, but 2 weeks ago ish, it was very artistic. It was very La Boheme. I had been having these very intense weeks and I was realizing okay, I need to start resting more. I need to start incorporating rest back into my days a bit more, but I hadn't quite gotten there. And I was having a St. Patrick's Day party. It was like midnight or 1 a.m. and this room was just full of lovely, gorgeous people. And I had just been exhausted since the party started. I'd been wrecked the whole time and just trying to keep myself going. I had 3 coffees that day and then 2 whiskeys, just trying to keep myself going. And I was talking to this guy. He was talking to me about Kafka for some reason. It was great. Yeah. No offense to the guy. It was a great conversation. I was there and I was like, I'm going to die. I was just my back, I was just getting these shooting pains all throughout my body. I was like, this is lovely man is talking to you about Kafka. What's happening? And I just was like, I am going to I'll be a moment. And I just sort of got up. There's about 30 people in here and the bedroom is the tiniest little apartment. The bedroom's just over there. And I just got up and I just went to bed. And the second I got into bed, I was telling myself, look, my back is just so sore. Everything hurts. I'm just going to lie down until it stops aching. Maybe it'll just take a second if I just take the pressure off my body. And I got into bed and I just started literally shaking. Just my whole body was shaking uncontrollably. I felt freezing cold, which is weird because it's Spain. It's the beginning of spring. It's quite warm and there was a lot of warmth from all the body heat and everything. So I hadn't been cold immediately beforehand. And it was just my entire body just started to shut down. And I had just pains everywhere. My skin hurt, my head ached, my ears hurt. It was wild. So I did not get up. 5 minutes later, I stayed there. I patiently waited for all the lovely people to leave my house. And then I've kind of been wrecked ever since. But in the days right afterwards, the feeling I had was just this enormous shakiness, and I had high temperatures, and I was just it was kind of fluish, but the way I felt it and the way I understood it is I don't think it was a virus because no one I know got it, and Megan was taking care of me the whole time I was sick and she didn't get anything. So I just really feel like it was my nervous system and my body just shutting down and being enough. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's just been a lot going on that I haven't really given myself the time to process. I both have and haven't. I've just been slowly beginning to open up the grief, and I'm not entirely sure how to deal with that and how to make space for that kind of falling apart. And also, I don't know if I said this to you, but I almost died in November. I like almost drowned in the sea.
Well, you definitely did not tell me about
Yes.
this.
Yeah. So, and when I got out of that situation, like when I went to the hospital afterwards, and basically one of Megan's friends, Marilu, I owe her my life. She saved me. She dragged me out of the sea. I had gone unconscious at this point. And when I came to, my body was just so full of fight or flight and this crazed energy. And so that was still in me. And then I literally, like the day after I drowned, went back to Ireland to see my relative who was dying. And so like the whole thing has just been wild. And there's a lot in my body that has not been, that I haven't been listening to. And so it's so interesting to me. Like I was in bed and I felt like I was so sure. And it was this interesting moment because my whole life I've had these medical problems and I've always looked outside of me for answers. I'd be Googling my symptoms and or asking a doctor who often had no fucking clue what was going on, waiting for someone else to tell me what was happening in my body. And this time it was just like there was no doubt in my mind. I woke up and I was like, this, I know this is so physical. I know this looks viral. I believe in my whole bones that this is psychosomatic or this is emotional. This is everything. And it was so interesting because afterwards, like the days afterwards, I was very emotional and it was kind of nice. I felt very relieved in a weird way. It was so strange. I was so anxious and so ill, but I also felt this feeling of relief of like my body just being like, oh my God, we can actually fall apart. We've just been wanting to fall apart. And this girl has been running around trying to do stuff, getting jobs, trying to write books, submitting to everyone. And it was just trying to learn Spanish in 2 days. Do you know what I mean? Like I felt this sense of relief and the sense of like, this feels human. And I don't know if I've been really feeling like a human. As much fun as I've been having, pushing myself in all these ways and getting excited about these dreams that I'm pursuing. It just felt so, once it happened, I realized like, okay, I get to just be human now and sit in my body. And it took me days to just like get all of the shaking out of me. And it feels like it was just all this like nervousness and I was crying a lot. And I guess trigger warning just for melodrama and to sadness. And I just realized even in that moment of just falling apart, like so much of the last 6 years in Dublin, like was this kind of mad survival, trying to get my body together, trying to scramble together a different kind of life, letting go of the belief that I would just be fully able-bodied and could follow a more normal path. And kind of, so there's a lot of like low-level trauma. And while I was going through it, I had to just say it was fine. And maybe now that I'm out of it and I'm safe, I'm finally getting to feel that pain of that period as well. So I think yeah, that's to me, a lot of what listening has been lately is just like my body has spoken to me. And even though it's physically painful, and even though like today I tried to leave the apartment for the first time and I walked down the stairs and I was just like, no, I can't, because we're not on the bottom floor. And I didn't even get outside. I just walked down the stairs and was like, oh God, no, I'm so ill. And I had to just like walk back upstairs again and get back into bed. But nevertheless, I'm so grateful because I feel that my body has reached out to me and been like, listen to me, like you're going off somewhere weird, come back. You're a human being. You're allowed to be a human being. And if you refuse to acknowledge your frailty and your vulnerability and your humanity, we're going to I guess, I don't know why is my body multiple people? I'm going to remind you. And oddly enough, for the first time in my life, I can honestly say what I feel about that is like, I'm almost choked up thinking about it, like is enormous amounts of gratitude.
Wow, this is so good. I have so many things to ask. I have so many things that this has made me think about. But first of all, I think you're so right that it is the body's way of trying to reach out to us and maybe sometimes even force us to slow down, especially as these highly motivated creative people. I mean, when do we ever stop? And that's kind of what art asks of us all the time, really, is
Mm-hmm.
like, you could continue writing your book for the rest of your life. So it's like it's constantly asking us, when are we allowed to rest? When do we get to decide this is it? We've earned it, we're done. It's like the end of this story. And it reminds me of a time a couple years ago where I also got sick, and nothing crazy, just a little cold or something. And I was on the couch, and it's like I hate being sick because it really leaves me alone with my thoughts, which sometimes I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
do. But on the other hand, there's this part of it that's like, oh my gosh, for the first time, I'm allowing myself to just rest and to be alone with my thoughts. And I should have no guilt around that because I'm sick and it's my body is forcing me to sit here and relax and rest. But then it begs the question, why do I feel guilty for trying to listen to myself and rest in these other moments of my life where it's just as valid?
Yeah, I mean, this was it's such a good question, and it did come up as well in the readings this week. She talks about perfectionism and how it's not like it. The trick of perfectionism, why it's so seductive, is that it makes you. It seems like it's a productive thought, like it seems like it's asking you to do something very specific and to hold yourself to a higher standard. But when you look at perfectionism, it's often like you'll never meet it. So it's just like this goal that you'll never reach. And it prevents you from finishing, it prevents you from moving on. But what I do think is interesting is when you were talking about rest, it made me think that like so much of this is about this feeling of being enough. And I think
Mm.
when you can't talk about rest without talking about enoughness, which is an idea that I learned from, I'm going to make sure, Trisha Hersey. They call her the nap ministry because she's like a nap advocate, but it's actually it sounds silly, but it's actually very political, very interesting and fascinating. And I really recommend anyone checks it out. But she talks about this kind of sense of like, we overwork ourselves because we've been told we're not enough and we're constantly striving to prove that we are enough. And in some
Mhm.
of the newsletters that I'm writing to accompany these videos, I've been writing and I've been thinking a lot about how part of the way I've kind of killed my creativity a little bit and why I need to resurrect it is because I have constantly thrown responsibilities onto it that it shouldn't have. And one of them is justifying enoughness. So if you need to be sick to rest, maybe it's because you're like, I'm not enough and I will be enough when I create this thing. And what if
Mhm.
we were able to switch it around? And that's why I love this whole idea of the getting something down approach, the idea of that, how unpersonal that is in a way, because it's like, what if we're already enough? And so creativity is just like an overspilling of that enoughness, and it doesn't define us
Mm.
at all, and it doesn't need to prove our worth. And I think what I've kind of realized is like on the surface, it would look like what I need to do is reframe my relationship with creativity. But actually, my creative practices, aside from the fact that sometimes I do them a little too hard and too long for my body's capability, are actually kind of okay. Like the work that needs to be done is my own lack of self-worth, because it's because of that part, it's because of the me part, the insecurities and the feelings that I'm not enough, I need to prove myself, I need to exhaust myself in order to prove myself. That's what seeps into the creativity maybe and kind of poisons it.
It just makes me think of how there's a quote, and I can't remember who it's attributed to, but there's this quote that says, if we can only understand, no, we can only live life forward, but it can
Mm-hmm.
only be understood backwards. And it's really famous, so I'm sure we can easily figure out who said that. But it's like, you can't it's so tempting to want to put the pressure on everything and your life and all of these things that, what does it mean? And it's like we're trying to reverse engineer our stories. And
Yes.
yeah, and it's like you physically cannot do that. It's great to have this starting point and maybe like a guiding light, but we have to be moving forward. And then it's like only at that point can we look back and say, okay, what are we learning from all of this? And so in terms of like, this idea that we have to earn this ability to rest, or our self-worth is defined by this thing that we do and then we get to rest. It's like this thing that we're never going to achieve. So I love the idea of kind of like you said, inverting that on its head and thinking of it backwards. It's like, what if we just operated from this place that we are enough? We're already operating from there. And then let's see what comes out of that space, instead of operating from the space of, I'm going to try to be enough by doing A, B, C, and D. And then what comes out of that space? I feel like often it's, the more self-hatred or the avoidance or the just beating yourself up, like, why, oh, this isn't what I wanted it to be, this isn't good enough, I'm not good enough, all that, like that just kind of breeds that when we come from that perspective. And then when we come from this other perspective of like, I'm enough and I'm so stoked about that, and I'm just like happy to be here on this earth, and my creative expressions are just part of that. Like, I think that creates so much more joy and so much more consistency of our work.
I think it's so interesting because when we talk about creativity in these terms, it actually really reminds me of like ecology and this like extractivism versus reciprocity. So like we are always taking from the earth, we're taking oil and nutrients and minerals and everything constantly, and air and food. And the whole idea of how unbalanced that is, it's a very like lacking mindset, it's a very capitalist mindset, it's a very like we always need more, we always have to be working. It's this the same kind of culture makes us extract from the earth, that makes us extract from ourselves, in like the labor force, and exploit each other and our own bodies. And I think what's so fascinating is like thinking about these things that we do, whether it's our creative work or our passions or our activism work or whatever else people do, these like labors of love, is like thinking about them in terms of reciprocity, this idea that you'd be in balance with nature, and that every time you take from nature you also try to give back to her, and that you and earth are in like a symbiotic relationship. And it's like, how, what if you, and the beauty of the reciprocity thing is that like if you extract from the earth, it does run out. But if you're in reciprocity, you guys can feed each other. You guys, you and the earth, feed each other and keep each other alive and help each other flourish. It's such a much it's a more balanced, a more beautiful relationship. And like, what if we try to imagine our relationship with our creativity in reciprocity? So like our magic and fullness and our restedness and the way we are filled up, like our cups are just filled up, that feeds our creativity. But we have to also then like let our creativity feed us back. We have to give ourselves at times for rest. We can't be extracting from our body constantly. We're not fracking.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you can't just like harvest everything all at once and then be like, okay, I'll just never plant another seed, or I'm never going to water this again. Like, I just harvested everything and now it's all going to grow back on its own. No, it requires us to be diligent about it and be mindful about it and be giving back to it and watering it and planting more seeds and cutting off the dead leaves that don't really matter anymore. It's like there's such there really is such like a life force. And what I find interesting too is that so many of the creatives that at least I know and follow, there's really this like the idea of a garden and plants and life and all of that is something that a lot of people tend to come back to. And I think there's a reason for that, because it's like you are a life force energy. Your creativity is an expression and is that life force energy. And so I think like plants, they're these living things, and it's such a visual representation, or like something that we can truly interact with, that shows this is what happens when we don't do the right things by a living force.
You said that
Yeah.
one of your notes, your bullet points for this week was listening to yourself and what your body craves and what your fears are telling you. Could you tell me about that? I want to hear about what my body has been screaming at me this week. I'd love to hear what your body was saying.
Well, okay. So this past week, it's been my time of the month. So there's been, lots of cravings that come with that. And I felt like I was really resistant to it. And like all I wanted was to make a batch of cookies. I just wanted to make a batch of cookies. I just really wanted to indulge in cookies. And I don't often let myself do that. Like, I don't feel like I have a problem with like, oh my gosh, she's just having cookies, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like, she's not actually giving herself any other nutrients. Like, it's not that serious. I can just have a cookie. But I kept doing this thing where I'm like, oh, I just don't feel like going to get all the stuff. And then like, doing all the hard work of making a batch of cookies. And also for your listeners and watchers, like a little bit of backstory on me, I'm a pastry school dropout, so I have this weird relationship with making cookies, because I was like verbally abused over batches of burnt cookies when I was in this school program trying to learn about them. So there's some like weird stuff there. It used to be something that like I really did to relax and find enjoyment and whatever. But so now I'm trying to get back to that like sense of healing, but there's just always this resistance that I have to making cookies, because I'm like, I'm just going to do it wrong. I'm just, they're going to come out horrible, whatever. So I kept making myself just be like, you can have a piece of dark chocolate from the freezer, just have a piece of dark chocolate that will satisfy your craving, because sometimes you're just craving something and then it'll go away in 20 minutes, or like, does my body actually need this? Is this actually what I want? Or am I just like habitually doing this thing over and over again? Most of the time, if I'm craving a little something sweet, as I do every day, because I have a sweet tooth and there's no shame in that, a little slice of dark chocolate is enough for me. I have it with my tea. I watch a show. It's a beautiful little ritual. But I was just finding that this like wasn't enough, and I was so resistant to that, because I'm like, you don't need the cookies, you don't, like what, like I said, there was just like so many different layers of issues that I was having just around this batch of cookies. And you want to know something? I finally was just like, I have not stopped thinking about this for a week. Okay, I want to make a batch. And so I finally made one. After I had my freaking cookies, it was fine. I don't know why I just like tortured myself for so long, like giving myself these little nuggets of like, here's a morsel of dark chocolate. Is this good enough? Is it? And it just like never was. Like, I just needed some time to properly indulge in something and not feel guilty for it, and not do the half-assed version of that and think that it was going to be satisfying. And all of this is just to say that, like, aside from the actual physical parts of what that could mean, satisfying your body physically with whatever it's actually craving, I think I do that in so many different areas of my life, where it's just like I avoid there. It's a common theme where there's this big thing that would make me so happy to do and would be so satisfying and would just be this wonderful thing. But then I make myself like, I won't let myself do that. I'm like, well, you could do this, or you could do that, or you could do this, instead of just being like, what would it feel like if I engaged with this big main thing that's so exciting to me, instead of just frittering away all of my time and energy on these things that are almost what I want, but not quite. Like another example is, I used to shop a lot. Like now I really like to go thrifting, and I don't even thrift as much as I once did. But instead of buying like one quality piece that could last me the test of time, this was a time I was much younger, and I was just going to Forever 21 and like shopping in the sale section and being like, ooh, but I can get so much more for my money. And instead of just getting this one big thing that would make me really happy and I would have forever, I want all these little things that I'm probably going to get rid of in 3 months time, 6 months time, because they're going to go out of style. They're not quality. They're not made well. So this is just like a common theme in my life, and I would imagine other people's lives, where why am I so resistant to listening to the thing that my body, my mind, my soul, my heart actually wants? Why am I trying to like cheat my way there?
And do you have any thoughts? Like, do you think it could be fear? Do you think there's a sense of like feeling you haven't deserved it? Like what comes up for you in that kind of feeling? Like, what do you think? Is it an unworthiness, do you think?
I think part of it is unworthiness, and I think part of it is I think I fear indulgence, because it's like I don't trust myself to have boundaries, because there was a time in my life where I really struggled with boundaries. I struggled with personal boundaries. I struggled with enforcing my boundaries with other people. And so I know there's a time in my life where I was such an indulgent person that if I engaged with, like, I wouldn't even let myself watch television or like sit down and just enjoy free time and rest, as we've been talking about, because it's like I have this fear that I'm going to get stuck there and I'm going to do too much of it. But then it also begs the question of like, am I overindulging in these things because I'm just this indulgent person and I can't control myself? Or is it that I won't let myself do things for such a long time, so that by the time I actually do the thing, I'm like, give it all, like just let it
Yeah.
all on me, because I'm so starved for this thing that my body, my heart, my mind, my soul are saying that I need. Whereas if I just listened to it and honored it in the moment, I would probably just move on from it and it would be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think it's interesting because we seem to fear resting too much or being lazy. But if we're really resting, like if we're not, because I think a lot of the time what we actually do is we kind of procrastinate on rest. Like we just watch TikToks for ages. We don't give ourselves that moment to calm down. But like if we really are resting, I don't think you can rest too much, because I think what happens when we are rested, when we are actually get to that place where we have successfully rested, is that our brains, which have been fried and exhausted, begin to wake up and begin to generate ideas again. And when we are rested and when we are full, what happens is our creativity comes alive. And like very much this week, I was just like, all I have to do is lie around. I'm not everything needs to stop. I need to just, I'm shaking. I need to get this together. And about a week in, like all these things that I've been really blocked in, that I've been kind of trying to do for like weeks, suddenly started to come to me really naturally. I was lying in bed and I started like writing things in just my notes app on my phone, because they were just coming to me fully formed. Like what we can do when we're rested is so much better than when we're just like crawling half dead across the finish line.
The perfect image to just summarize all of it. Well, I have a question for you. So you mentioned, what have I been listening to? And I want you to elaborate on that. And I also want to ask you, in addition to all of those thoughts, you have been having this year of not listening to anything, any external sources. So your thoughts on that were kind of reminding me of this fact that you don't really have any external input. So I'm curious, literally, what have you been listening to?
Yeah. So I think one of the really beautiful things about my little like no distraction year is
Mhm,
that when you stop listening to the world in like a literal way, you
mhm,
begin to hear in your own mind all the ways that the voices of the world have taken root there, because you're left with your own devices. It's kind of like the first time you kind of realize, oh, I've internalized that. It's been really actually quite bizarre and slightly painful seeing all the things I've internalized.
mm,
Um, but I will say that I think I've noticed that when we are a lot of what I've been doing lately is a little is I mean, I think especially since January, because there, after the death and everything, I have been trying quite hard. So I guess ever since this year started, I'm not listening to things. I have been trying quite hard to go towards taking care of myself. I have been making healing and self-care and just trying to learn to be a human being well, a priority. But at the
yeah,
same time, it's so interesting seeing all the ways in which I get taken away from that. And I think a lot of what we listen to that isn't our bodies, that isn't our knowing, that isn't, like, it sounds corny, but I think it's very true. Like, it isn't love. I think we should be listening to love all the time. It usually is right.
mm,
I think what we listen to instead is like, is this feeling of unworthiness? I think a lot of my feelings of unworthiness have come from having health problems and therefore not being able to like work as hard or do as much as
yeah,
people who don't have those health problems. And this feeling that people are going to think I'm lazy, feeling that people are going to think I'm like useless or like not don't have any get up and go, this kind of like this
yeah,
stereotype I have in my head that's like not anything one person said to me. It's this hodgepodge of these subtle messages I've got for the last couple of years. And I do think that one of the things, there's a lot of things, but one of the things that I listen to is my sort of desire to act from my own internalized ableism and constantly try to prove myself. And instead, I should be just not accepting that premise. I should just, and what I want and what I'm working towards and what I hope to get out of this year is to get to a place where I can just be like, that seems silly to me. Like the idea that someone would say that about me or about anyone, or that the
yeah,
idea that our worth is based on how much we can do in that way, you know intellectually that's wrong to me, but I still act from it because we're not perfect people, and we are conditioned by the world that we live in, and you have to work very hard to uncondition yourself. But I think what's interesting is that, like, in all of this, as I have been noting over the past few months, all the things that I do listen to unbeknownst to me, and all of these voices in my head that maybe, like, we all have, like a small example is like the voice in your head that's always telling you to lose weight, or the voice in your head, these
mhm,
voices that you're like, intellectually I know this isn't what I think, this isn't what I believe, but it is in there. And I've been thinking about how, in order to redirect my attentions and in order to stay stronger than these voices that have been just thrust upon us since birth, we have to have something stronger to listen to. And I think in these past 3 months, left in silence, I've developed such a deep, profound jealousy of people who have like a rock solid spiritual foundation, because I
mm,
feel like I'm an understanding that I've been coming to is like, so much of what a spiritual practice is a listening practice, and it's
mhm,
inventing something or having something passed down to you by a tradition or whatever, discovering something that you can listen to that won't trick you, like something you can trust when you listen to it.
mm,
um and I think what I'm sort of searching for, and what this week has been really expanding, is like, what can I listen to? Like, if okay, if I'm not listening to like these like kind of patriarchal colonial ableist voices, and if I'm not listening to like social media and all of their mad trends that are often, if you scratch the surface, like little nefarious, like, what am I
mhm,
listening to? The easiest thing would be like, oh, listen to these like really, write on movements, listen to politics, listen to theory, but you can't, like, as an individual, as a human being, like, what is the comfort? Because I've turned to social media, and I've turned to things that ultimately, social media is fine, but like I've turned to specific channels and specific ideologies that have hurt me in the past because they're comforting in the short term, believing that you can be productive and frack your body and then get approval and never have to feel unworthy again because you've earned worthiness. It's actually a very comforting belief at the beginning. I think that's why so many people are locked in it, because it's really seductive to think that you'll be above judgment or that you'll prove yourself and no one can criticize you ever again. Yeah, but like I feel like if I'm going to turn away from these false voices that are in me that ask me to do bad things and that take me away from myself and that make me lose sight of the importance of just having fun, the importance of being with people, the importance of, you know what I mean? Like I it's shocking to me how many times, even though I have actually had a very social couple of months, which has been lovely, it's shocking to me how many times I've worked myself to the place where I didn't have enough energy to see people, and like how many social occasions I've missed because that's such a like red flag for me in some ways when I'm putting all my energy in one place and I find that suddenly other aspects of my life start withering because I haven't been leaving. That's how I always know, like, oh, I'm in trouble. Yeah, so I think searching for that thing to listen to, and like I don't know, like we talk about, like, you know, having the Artist Way is such a spiritual text, and as someone without a traditional spiritual leaning, I'm often like trying to work out how that applies to me. And I think for me, what that spiritual practice is going to be a search for like what I want to listen to, what I can trust. And I think that's like my problem in the past has been when I try to follow other people's spiritual doctrines, even really loose ones, even really progressive, vague ones, I nevertheless lose myself a bit because there's a little bit of it that doesn't feel right with me and that doesn't really relate to me. And I begin to kind of act out a role of a spiritual person instead of being myself. And that's why it's always just taken me further from myself trying to do these things. But I was kind of just like, what if that practice, that listening practice, like what would that feeling be even? And I was trying to write, I've been in my journal like writing down, okay, if I was to embark once again on I don't even want to say spiritual practice, but that kind of practice, and a listening practice, like what am I listening to and who am I listening to? And is it me? And is it not quite me? And what does it have to be? And what does it not have to be? And I've been writing down all of the things that it isn't going to be. And that's been making me feel very safe, because for what I'm afraid of, I think, with these things is that I'm going to become manipulatable and I'm going to accidentally, as has happened so many times, just start acting out a different character, you know. Anyway, the kind of the Zen goddess. I'm going to start wearing a lot of crop tops. Like, that's what I'm afraid of. And I think it's interesting. I keep saying again and again in these podcasts, like, I feel very influenceable. And that's why I went silent. And I think it's interesting because I think I was just, again, journaling and this week a lot. And I real tome that thing. And I was like, have I always felt that influenceable? And on some level, yes. But I also think maybe I'm just not I'm in a bit of a liminal phase in my life. I think there's been times when I felt more tangible to myself. And I think that's very natural. I think we all go through phases where we're a little bit less set in stone, and we go through phases where a bit more I'm amorphous, or a bit more in a cocoon, kind of maybe in a transition, transforming into something else. And I think I feel very like obscure to myself and messy and half formed right now, and I think I'm trying to just surrender to that and not mind that I don't feel very real to myself at the moment, and also really think about what I want to be listening to, and what feelings and ideas I want to guide me forward, and where I shouldn't be listening, and that's all of that.
Yeah, I'm actually really inspired by you, and I think it's fantastic that you are the one who came to me wanting to do the Artist Way journey and learning more about your feelings towards spirituality and your, you know, curiosity towards it, and your, you know, you you say that you don't really have a very defined idea of it for you and something that feels comfortable quite yet for you. But I really, I think it's so great that you're so open-minded to doing something like this, because I think that that would be a major barrier for a lot of people, just seeing even the word like a spiritual journey, like a 12-week spiritual journey. I think
Yeah.
that would freak so many people out. In fact, it does freak so many people out. And
Mm-hmm.
I just think that that's fantastic that you're able to, I don't know, just like have such an open mind towards figuring this out. It's not like you're rooted in like, oh, this isn't for me and I just write it off. It's like, how could it be for me? And I'm curious, like, do you feel comfortable sharing anything that is something that you're like either not wanting to have be part of your spirituality, or something that you definitely want to have it be a part of it?
Oh, okay. That's a great question. So first I wanted to just say that like I feel like that's so interesting because I think this is like such a weird like quirk of my personality is that I really do understand the necessity for me and for some people for that
Mhm.
spiritual practice. I feel a deep desire to be moored in something so that I'm not
Mhm.
just because I am such a chaotic person. I do think I have the personality of someone who does turn to spirituality because I am like a mile a minute thinking every day another identity, every week another, like you've kind of like epiphany of like, well, this is how I'm going to live now, and it's all
Yeah.
very chaotic, and I really want something to cling on to, and I want something to kind of have that relationship with, and as I said, something to listen to. And so
Yes.
I really enjoy like spiritual thinkers like Liz Gilbert, who I bring up all the fucking time, or like Trisha Hersey, who I mentioned, who did the nap ministry stuff,
Yeah.
and she uses a lot of religious language. And when I hear people say things like talking about for example the nap ministry, and like how they were talking about like this kind of extractive relationship we have with our bodies versus the understanding that our bodies are divine and that our bodies are made and we're perfect, like even though I don't metaphysically believe necessarily like in the same God that she believes in, and I don't really know what that means when she says those things to her, I nevertheless am like there's something so fundamental about that, and it's just like this opposition of like, here's the way you've been hoodwinked to think, and here's something that I just believe is this magic beautiful thing. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, yeah, I don't know if we were created by a bearded man, but I do want to be living a life that's anchored towards the loving thing, the beautiful thing, the magic thing.
Yeah.
And so I spend a lot of time, I think, reading spiritual texts and then like doing a lot of mental work. And I'm like, she says God, but what she means is that feeling you get when you're in the woods and like you're with your family and your friends. And like, I just do a lot of like, and even like I was doing the artist way with my partner,
Yeah.
and like we'd be talking about it, and there'd be questions of the artist way, because my partner is also very secular, and like there'd be questions that have God in them, and my partner would be like, oh, we can't do that one, and I'd be like, no, we just need to answer it as if she said this, and then I just say this completely different sentence, but it's like I can translate them from one to the other really fast.
That's what I think is so
Yeah.
fantastic about the way that your mind works, is like that's exactly my point, is so many people just are like, oh, this isn't for me. And I just really admire your ability to be like, I can make this for me, like
Yeah, I can make it work because I do
yeah.
need it, and I am
Yeah.
neurotic, and it is working for me. So
I love
I can't
that.
afford to not do this. Like these are the calmest people there are. One thing I wanted my thing that I listen to be is um to be both like a complete source of self-love, like a feeling of like I'm just completely worthy, I'm completely whole, but
Mm.
not totally solipsistic, because sometimes when I look at some spiritual tradition, some new age spirituality stuff, there is a complete decontextualizing of the world. So like that balance of like I want to be listening to something that helps me feel both like I'm not the most important person in the world, and like I
Mhm.
want to be of service, and I want something I'm listening to that's a little bit better than me, that's a little bit more selfless than me, that wants to give more, that can work through me, like a feeling of strength that works through me and helps me show up for other people and act in solidarity, even when I myself am too afraid, because I've heard people talk about their gods being useful in that way. and and you know, working through them. And I did hear someone say once, use me that I may know the pleasure of being used by you. And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to feel used by goodness. Like, I'll take, yeah, okay, thanks to theistic people, I'll take some of that.
Yeah.
But then also just like not feeling like constantly judging myself, feeling like there's this thing I believe in, that I'm listening to, this sense, this idea that I am just enough. So it's those are two things. And also something that wants the best for me in this kind of like stern, kind of quiet way, like this almost sensibleness. I kind of like the idea of my imaginary higher power of choice, my theoretical higher power of being like quite a sensible person, ironically. Like you would imagine it being this really like floaty, but I'm floaty enough for both of us. I got that covered. I like the idea of a soft, gentle voice from somewhere within me kind of going, all right, like, I know you're thinking of doing a tequila shot. How about a cup of tea? Gently, just a voice of quiet reason. And also maybe a little bit more, if I'm sometimes getting whipped away on something I've read or something I've seen and wanting to completely reinvent my personality, someone who's just steady and just knows who I am and knows what I like. And in that sense, the devotional practice being going back to those things that ground me to myself. So the devotional practice being reading my favorite authors, being dancing to ABBA, like that is that as a religious practice, and knowing that I have to keep doing these things in a funny way to keep in touch with myself and to keep in touch with this thing. What it needs to not be is, it needs to not lead me into this place where I am looking. Sometimes I think I'm going to listen to these like nice Zen vibes that everyone seems to be having so much fun with. I'm going to, you know, but what I actually end up listening to is a bunch of spiritual podcasts and a bunch of mindfulness podcasts. And then I just get down this whole weird other gravy train. And they're never entirely as divorced from all the other bullshit as they say they are. Some of them are, but a lot of them are quite in the world and in, you know, status and in capitalism and everything. So what it needs to not be is just like me. It needs to be me listening to myself. It needs to be me being like the voices within me. It needs to not be me being like the voice is going to be told to me through, you know, an American millionaire who's really good at yoga. And it also needs to not require that I turn off any part of my brain and just say, well, everyone seems to be really healthy and really happy when they believe this thing and they believe in this God and they say these chants. So I'm just going to give it a try and leave my brain at the door. Like, it needs to not be that either. And those are some of the things I wrote down for what I would want my spirituality to be and to not be.
I really think it's interesting, this idea of like the very all or nothing approach, because I deal with that too. And I don't know if it comes from being passionate or whatever. There could be any number of things, you know, again, that feeling like, oh, I'm not enough and this seems like it's enough. But yeah, I think it can be so seductive to like find this thing and then just like disappear into it. And speaking of Liz Gilbert, I mean, I know she talks about that in like her relationships with men in the past, like just like taking a nosedive into becoming whoever this person is or wants to be. You know, if he's really into motorcycles, she's on a motorcycle. If he's really into the spiritual practice, like she's really into the spiritual practice. And I have definitely struggled with that. And like when you're talking about, you know, you're reading something or watching something and you just feel yourself get that pull of like, I need to reinvent myself. Like, I understand that so deeply. And I also think it comes from like being a creative, you know. It's like we're such great storytellers with ourselves. We're so imaginative, so it's just so easy to like, you get that inspiration. And I've often thought about it as like, sometimes I feel like I treat myself like an art project. but not in a good way. Like that can be done in a
Yes.
good way, but that can also be done in sort of a destructive way where it's like, I'm not good enough anymore. Let me try on this thing, or let me try on that
Mm.
thing. And it's like, I am just this amalgamation. Like I'm just trying to express these things, again, coming from that place of I'm not good enough. Like that's the bedrock foundation. I'm not
Mm.
good enough. So let's turn myself into this art project of like, I'm going to be this Frankenstein of all these different things that I think are going to get me to be good enough. And now I feel like as I become more mindful of this and I move through my journey of life, and I've been more open to, trying these creative things and finding courage through my creative practices, I do feel like it's starting to shift in time to, what if I am good enough and I do want to make my life a work of art? I do believe that, I am uh, oh, an art project. Like life is kind of an art project, but it's a totally different energy of this seems fun. I want to play, but at least I know who I am when I'm like making this foray into one new thing or another. And it's like, if it didn't work for me, I didn't need to go like 1,000% into it, or that means I tried that, it didn't work for me. It's like, can
Mm.
I try that on and then realize like, well, these are the elements that feel really good. And I'm going to take a little bit of this and I'm going to take a little bit of that. And then I just feel like I am, again, this, this masterwork, this masterpiece, this art project of all these different inspirations turning into one unique expression versus like, none of this is working and I'm so shit and I don't know why I can't get it right. It's like there is no getting it right. It's just, it's all play, it's all an
Mm.
exploration.
Yeah, and I really relate to everything you just said. And I do think like that's kind of I think that's what I've been thinking about a lot with this kind of like listening spiritual practice thing is like I feel like I would be safer. I would feel safer. And like who knows, you might problematize this later, but I feel like I would feel safer and probably be a little bit safer if I did know, and like we're evolving people, so that'll change. But if I did have this connection to listening to this voice within me, that voice of knowing, um and knowing and like having that grounded voice and being like, so I can try on different things if I want to, and I can be creative and I can go off on some lark over here, but and just go on some crazy journey and try something out, but I do
Yeah,
know where how to come home. And I
yeah,
think it's that feeling of not having a home in yourself, like that feeling of like I don't know where base camp is, like when I
yeah,
stray and I try something out, I don't know how to come back or where back is or what my like neutral position is. And it's a
yeah,
very scary, erratic feeling way
yeah.
of being, I think.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, not feeling like so lost in space. And it's just like, I mean, it kind of always reminds me of that scene in Finding Nemo where they're like swimming through the thing and then they're just like so totally lost. Like that's how it feels, at least in my mind, when like there's I don't know where I came from. I
Mm,
don't know where I'm going to. I don't know when I'm ever gonna get out of this. And yeah, it's terrifying.
yeah. And I think, I don't know if you know about like Sartre, like the French philosopher. He had this whole idea about how like we find our freedom terrifying. So if we're not attached to like a
Mm,
religious doctrine, like
hmm
our lives are kind of like meaningless, not in a bad way, but just like we get to
hmm
create our own meaning. And he had this belief, he had this term called bad faith, and it's basically where you're so overwhelmed by like the amount of possibility and your own freedom to create yourself and create your life that just you want to be less free, so you start to like submit to an ideology in bad faith, which basically means you no longer have to make the decisions, you no longer have to work it all out for yourself. he
mm,
kind of he kind of saw it as kind of like a failure, or sort of like almost like a cop out. And like a great example of it is like the second season of Fleabag. I don't know if you've seen it, but like it's very much about bad faith. She's just so lost, and she meets this Catholic priest, and it's this kind of meditation on like she kind of, even though she's this like sexually active, positive, like British woman walking around London, like feminist, etc. She's so attracted to this idea of just being told what to do. And there is this scene where she's kind of just like crying and saying, "Tell me what to do." And I feel like when we are lost and we have no base camp, we are very vulnerable, and we're very vulnerable to bad faith. We're very vulnerable to someone or anything, an idea that just says, if you follow this, you'll be okay. I've also gotten into bad faith just in small ways, like the that girl thing. Like there's been times when I've just been like, oh, I'll just like tie my hair in really tight buns and like drink green smoothies, and then I'll like all my existential dread and like the complexities of life will just like be
I feel
cool.
attacked.
Right though? I wanted to bring in what you were saying about learning
Yeah.
to listen more, and you were talking about um the possibility that it could be like an aspect of avoidance, and then I was wondering if that avoidance kind of ties in with what we were talking about. So just fire away, let me know like if the avoidance has something to do with a greater listening and what we are avoiding.
Yeah, well, I specifically mentioned that I suspect that my form of avoidance comes through lecturing people. Basically, I've gone on this personal exploration of realizing that I'm a very deeply passionate person, and I'm quite a curious person. And so that means that I'm often, doing a lot of research and getting really excited by these new things that I discover. And my first thing is that I want to share it with people. I want to teach people. And I am very passionate about, I want to live this masterpiece life, like we were discussing. And I don't just want to do that on my own. I want other people to do it too. So if I learn something new that it's like, I think this could really help people, or I hear someone complaining about something, it's like, I was just reading about this, and like maybe we could try this. And I am a solution seeker, and that has always served me very well. I don't like to wallow. I don't like to get trapped in these bad emotions. Not that I don't want to feel the bad emotions, because I'm very comfortable. I will just like cry in the middle of a grocery store. Like I'm very comfortable doing that. I don't fear my emotions, and I don't fear negativity, but I just don't want to stay there forever. It's like, I love a rainy, gloomy day. It's moody. It's different. It's a different expression. Totally fine with that. I don't want it to rain every single day. I want to see the sun sometimes, so anyway, all of that to say, but I noticed this tendency in myself that, I'm a talker. And if someone is complaining to me, it's very well intentioned, but I will just kind of like keep berating, not berating, but like just give an over amount of information, and I don't really ask questions, and I don't really listen. And maybe this person doesn't want help. Maybe this person doesn't want this particular type of help. Why do I assume that I have all the answers? And it's an interesting thing, because like, also a side note, I took this personality test, which I've taken before. It's like the 16 personalities, Myers-Briggs. And I have taken it before, and I decided to take it again. And I got a different, very similar, but different result. And it was like going through like the strengths and weaknesses. It was like spot on. Like, you get really excited when you learn something new, but then you kind of come across as like, demeaning, or, whatever, like a know-it-all or whatever. And I was like, fine, whatever. But I'm just trying to like, it's been this interesting experience of trying to figure out like, I don't know what to do with this personality that I have, because it feels wrong to feel like you have an answer that could help somebody. And what am I supposed to do? Just keep it to myself? Because it's like, well, I have to do more listening. You know what I mean? So it's like, I'm just trying to figure out this balance of, I don't want to not help someone with something if I feel like I could help them, but also sometimes not listening to them is its own form of not helping. And then to go even deeper, I think I get stuck sometimes in communicating and trying to help other people with these things that I myself might be struggling with, because I'm also trying to avoid that I'm struggling with them. Am I trying to help other people at the same time that I'm avoiding the things that I need to work on in myself? And I do think it comes from a good intention of, like I said, I just want to lift everybody up with me. And why am I going to like keep this information to myself? You know, I don't want to be stingy with my like information and help, but I do feel I need to balance it with like, does this person need this help in this way? Do they want this help in this way? Why do I assume that I am this oracle of help?
Do you think, okay, so when at the point at which you identify you have something you're struggling with, and then
Yeah.
you look for the information,
Yeah.
and then you receive the information, in that moment you're like almost a student. You're in this position of like, there's something you don't know, there's something you haven't internalized. It's like an uncomfortable situation. And the moment you get to tell someone and instruct them on it, you get to be in this position of knowing and almost like authority again. And do you think there's this like desire to escape the position of being the student? Do you think there's like a desire to escape that place where it's like, I have to be here in the murkiness of this? Because I also think, I've been thinking about this lately, because I've been thinking about like a lot of like physical and psychological work that I'm doing, and the impulse that I have to like vlog it. And then I'm like, I don't like, lots of people do that, and that's really cool. And a lot of where I learned a lot of these skills is from people who were vlogging it. So I do
Yeah.
think it's like a good thing to do, like morally or whatever. Like I do think it's a very brave and kind thing to do. But also I'm like, am I jumping the gun a little bit here? Because is there a part of me that wants to share it and vlog it? Because if I'm doing it and it's not slightly a performance, it's not slightly an art project, if I'm just actually doing it for myself, I have to sit in the discomfort, the pain, the confusion, all of it, like as a
Yeah.
subjective experience. Do you think that
Yeah.
might be something that might have something to do with it for you?
Yeah, that's very wise and a great insight. And I totally think that there's some stuff there. And it's this very layered thing though, because it's like we're such social creatures, and we are here evolving, and the point at which we have evolved because of sharing of ideas. And so there's like, again, I totally don't want to ever come off as like that know-it-all, or like I've got it figured out, just listen to mama, but like but I also want to, I guess the way that I view it is like, hey, I'm trying this thing. Maybe you could try this thing too. And maybe this thing will also help. And then we could try it together. But I just think like the delivery sometimes, because of that insecurity of like, I want to feel like I have it all figured out, and, I'm not the student anymore.
Mm,
It's like the delivery can come across as like, I'm being a know-it-all. And by the way, no one has even said like you're being a
mm.
know-it-all or you're being condescending or whatever. No one has said that. This is just an insecurity that I have. But yeah, interesting to think
I think
about.
I am gonna make another Zoom because we have
Okay.
like less than a minute, but I want to
Okay.
keep talking about this. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Art Therapy. The course we are following is based on the book The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. If you would like to continue to follow us on this journey, you can find us every week for 12 weeks straight, alternating between Veronica's channel, Veronica Vicora, and my channel, The Prime of Life. You can also click here to gain access to the full playlists of episodes in order. Links to our channels, as well as our various other outlets and to the Artist's Way book in both audio and PDF form, can be found in the description. Until next time, sending love.